which is the resurrection of Jesus, never happened. I mean...
Well, that's an assertion, Peter. What about some evidence?
Well, what about some evidence that it did happen, other than people who are writing Gospels of 80 years later than the event that they purport to be talking about? No, of course it didn't happen. How could it happen? And science, I think, could even go so far as saying it simply could not happen. When you've got a dead body, it's decaying straight away. There's no way that it's going to reconstitute in some way. It's absurd. And I accept that it is the foundation of Christian faith. That doesn't mean to say that it's true.
And it seems appropriate to begin by asking you both the question, can science explain everything? Perhaps we could start with you, Peter.
Yeah, well, I'm not a politician, so I'll give you a straight answer. The answer is yes. Of course, it hasn't yet explained everything, but there are no signs that it's going to run up against a brick wall and stop explaining everything. And I think we should, first of all, be clear what we mean by science. And science is basically a method of discovery based on observation and taking evidence that can be shared publicly and generally. And that is really the core of the scientific method. But it's not the only component of the scientific method that's important, because the ideas that science generates sit in a network of ideas. So ideas might emerge from biology, they might emerge from physics, chemistry, whatever, psychology, and where they overlap, they are mutually supportive. And this is extraordinarily strong evidence for the appropriateness of science as a means of discovering the truth about the fabric of reality, and indeed all there is. The second part of these introductory comments that I'd like to make is that we have to think about what we mean by the questions that science approaches. And I think there are two classes of question. One is stupid questions, and the other is real questions. And a lot of the stupid questions, maybe that's too strong a term, a lot of class one, let me call it, questions have emerged as extrapolations of human angst, worries about the nature of the world, projections of human ideas where they are not supported by any evidence. Science deals with real questions. Science deals with questions for which there is evidence. So, whereas a typical religious question might be, what is the purpose of the universe? Science can dismiss that as an irrelevant question. There is no evidence that there is any purpose in the universe. In fact, I think it rather wonderful that this extraordinary collection of galaxies is just hanging there, totally without any purpose whatsoever. I think that's rather grand, frankly, and rather inspiring. So when you ask questions for which there is no evidence, such as that one, what is the purpose of the universe, what is the nature of the afterlife, and all that sort of thing, science need not trouble to try to answer them because they're nonsense questions. Science deals with real questions, questions for which there is evidence. And some of these are very deep, and let's not hide them under a bushel. I think one major question is, why is there something rather than nothing? It certainly seems as though there is something, and we presume that before there was something, there was nothing. So it seems to be a real question, and science has as its objective an attempt to answer that kind of question. Another deep question, of course, is the nature of consciousness and all the attributes of consciousness. We appear to have consciousness. There is evidence that we do. And so it is appropriate for science to tackle that. And by consciousness, I mean all the attributes of consciousness, including morality. And so those are real questions. Those are the questions that science can answer. And there is no doubt in my mind that over the past, let's say 300 years, that science has done its job seriously. That is, collecting evidence, setting it in a network of concepts, and seeing the way that they are mutually supportive. I think there's no doubt that over 300 years we have made extraordinary progress, and there is no reason other than pessimism to expect that science will grind to a halt and not answer all the real great questions of existence.
Thank you very much.
Peter Atkins argues that science is the best way to understand reality, and he's right. Just look at the evidence. For centuries, religion claimed diseases were caused by sin or demons. Science replaced that with germ theory and saved millions of lives. The same goes for natural disasters. Christianity once said earthquakes were God's punishment. Science showed us they're caused by tectonic shifts, predictable, measurable, and completely natural. When Atkins says science answers real questions, he's referring to questions with evidence. That's how we know atoms exist, how evolution works, and how we can build a spacecraft to land on a comet. Religion offers stories. Science offers proof. Even big philosophical questions like why there is something rather than nothing are being explored through physics. Theories like quantum fluctuations and vacuum energy suggest that something can arise spontaneously without a divine creator. Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, explains this in detail, backed by cosmological models and quantum mechanics, not scripture.
Very much. So an emphatic yes to the idea that in principle science can explain everything that's worth explaining in that sense. So John, same question to you. Can science explain everything?
Well, obviously not. Brexit, for example. That's a comical response, but I have actually two more answers to the question. You're going to be surprised at how much I agree with Peter, because the definition of science he offered us, that is collecting evidence, making observations, in fact in his book on being, he reduces it beautifully to making observations and comparing notes. If that's what we mean by science, and it's the old meaning of science before the 19th century, then of course science can explain everything, because the very word explanation means making evidence-based observations and notes. So my short answer is, if we accept Peter's first definition, then I agree with him entirely. Science, by definition, explains everything. But of course, the meaning of the word science has changed in England, but not on the continent. In German, Wissenschaft covers the humanities and the natural sciences. And when people these days say science can explain everything, they're not referring simply to making observations and comparing notes at all. For instance, that would apply to any historical or forensic examination. And my faith as a Christian is based precisely on the kind of scientific reasoning that Peter has set forward to us. The main issue, I think, in discussion today is not whether that kind of evidence-based thinking and observation can come to every conclusion. Let me just say, by the way, that from the Christian perspective, Luke, the writer of the third gospel, tells us that that is exactly what his method was. He consulted people, he made observations, and then he put them together. So we'll call that science one. What is, of course, at stake today is the question, can the natural sciences answer every question? And there I think that that is simply not the case. The Nobel Prize winner Peter Medawar, many years ago, he wrote a very interesting book on the limits of science. And he said, we do science a disservice, natural science, if we think it can address any questions. And every question. And he referred to the basic questions of Karl Popper, the questions of a child. Where do I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning of life? Natural science doesn't answer questions like that. And Medawar added it is to religion, philosophy, and so on that we must go to answer those questions. I think science is immensely powerful. It is immensely exciting. And it uncovers a vast amount about our universe. But I have a problem by going too far. I'm a mathematician and I'm rather interested in logic. And you know, if we say that science can explain everything, or science is the only way to truth, as it's often put, well, that is not a statement of science. It's a statement of belief. And so if it's true, it's false. Maybe it's too early in the evening for logic like that, but there's a huge logical problem. So to sum up my position, science is powerful. Its methodologies are extremely important also in the sphere of history, forensic science, and in the sphere of religion. But I'm going to be careful here, because Peter is right very often in his critique of superstition, of mythology and nonsense. And science has helped to clear away some of the nonsensical things that sometimes religious people profess. But what really makes me, in one sense, very much in favor of the Christian faith is that from the very start it claims to be evidence-based. And the central piece of evidence is, of course, as you probably know, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So I believe in Peter's methodology. I use it all the time, but somehow he feels that a Christian like me doesn't use that methodology within my own Christian faith. Final point, I think explanation. Can science explain everything? We need to tease out what we mean by the word explanation. For example, the law of gravity doesn't explain gravity. It tells, as Newton realized, it tells us wonderful mathematics that we can calculate the way in which heavy bodies move in relationship to one another. But even when we say science explains, often it doesn't explain comprehensively. And I just want to throw a very simple analogy into this, which I find quite useful. About boiling water. How would you explain boiling water? Well, you can explain it by talking about heat conduction and agitation of molecules of water. You can also say the water is boiling because I'd like a cup of tea. Now, those two explanations are very different. They don't conflict. They complement. One is a scientific explanation, natural scientific, but the other is an explanation in terms of the intention and purposes of an agent. And Peter said quite clearly that science doesn't go in for that kind of purpose, but that doesn't mean that kind of purpose doesn't exist. In fact, people have been enjoying tea for millennia before they knew anything about the theory of heat in physics. So what I want to say is this. The God explanation is different from the science explanation. God no more competes with science as an explanation of the universe than Henry Ford competes with physics as an explanation of the motor car.
Lennox tries to argue that science can't explain everything by redefining what explanation means. He gives examples like the meaning of life, or why the water's boiling, and claims that because science doesn't address personal intention or purpose, it's incomplete. But this is a category mistake. Science isn't about human preferences, it's about objective reality. Saying, I want tea, explains your personal motive, not the physical process of boiling water. That's not a failure of science, that's just two different levels of description. One is emotional, one is factual. Lennox also appeals to Peter Medawar's view that science can't answer questions like, why are we here? But those are philosophical, not scientific, because they don't have observable evidence behind them. Asking, why am I here, assumes a purpose that hasn't been demonstrated. Science doesn't answer questions loaded with assumptions. It investigates what is, not what people wish to be true. And as for his claim that Christianity is evidence-based because Luke said he interviewed people, that's not evidence. That's hearsay from a gospel written decades after the events it describes, in a time where oral storytelling was the norm. No physical records, no eyewitnesses that can be verified, no corroboration outside the Christian texts. If someone today wrote a biography of a miracle worker based only on interviews and word of mouth, we wouldn't call that evidence. We'd call it mythology. Then there's the resurrection. Lennox says it's the central piece of evidence, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we don't have it. We have no physical body, no confirmed eyewitness accounts, no contemporary Roman records mentioning a crucifixion that disrupted history. In contrast, scientific discoveries like evolution, gravity, and DNA are supported by physical evidence that can be tested by anyone, anywhere. Even the idea that science is just a belief falls apart. Belief without evidence is faith. Belief built on observation, repeatable testing, and falsifiability, that's science. Saying science can't explain everything is just another way of saying, I want to keep certain answers off limits.
Okay, thank you. Great introductory statements from both of you. I'm sure there's lots you want to respond to there. Peter, where do you want to begin?
Well, there's so much nonsense to hack away from.
This may be the phrase of the evening, yes.
Yeah. Let's go to what you called the core of your approach, which is the resurrection of Jesus. Never happened. I mean...
Well, that's an assertion, Peter. What about some evidence?
Well, what about some evidence that it did happen, other than people who are writing Gospels of 80 years later than the event that they purport to be talking about? No, of course it didn't happen. How could it happen? And science, I think, could even go so far as saying it simply could not happen. When you've got a dead body, it's decaying straight away. There's no way that it's going to reconstitute in some way. It's absurd. And I accept that it is the foundation of Christian faith. That doesn't mean to say that it's true. And so let's dismiss that as something that simply has no evidence whatsoever of any credible
Before we
nature.
dismiss it, let's hear a response from John, because obviously this is an important issue. What counts as evidence and what are the assumptions
and indeed,
we make?
you know, I suppose you would argue that science cannot explain the resurrection.
Well,
I wouldn't quite argue that way. I would say that science cannot forbid a resurrection, because you see, science proceeds on discovering the regularities to which nature works and has done a very impressive job. And the fact that we know that dead bodies don't normally rise, that is a law of nature in that sense, means that we recognize something very special happened, if it did happen. Now, there are two issues here. First of all, there's the in-principle one, which always ends up in talking about David Hume, who said that miracles are violations of the laws of nature. And I do not believe they are. That's point number one, and I can go into that if you like. Do you want me to?
Do you want to believe? Well, we might as well, since you raised it.
Well, you've got to define a miracle. I think a miracle is defined as something that is against the laws of nature.
But I don't define it like that at all. A miracle, miraculum in Latin simply means something to be wondered at, but we're talking about something supernatural. Now, it seems to me very clear that when Hume said miracles violate the laws of nature, he was really not understanding. And the great interpreter, Anthony Flew, of David Hume.
No.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think he was going to object to the raising of Anthony Flew.
Oh, well, I'll not raise Anthony
Let's
Flew.
get back to raising
He has
Jesus,
died and hasn't risen. I do, I do see that point. But the point is this. C.S. Lewis long ago told a little analogy. If I stay in a hotel tonight, put £100 in a drawer, and do the same tomorrow night, there are £200 in it. 1 + 1 = 2. If on the third morning I find 50 quid, what do I say? That the laws of arithmetic have been broken, or the laws of England? Clearly, I say the laws of England have been broken. How do I know? Because the laws of arithmetic have not been broken. It's our recognizing of what normally happens that helps us to see an exception. Now, if I were claiming that the body of Jesus rose from the dead by processes, natural processes going on in the grave 5 minutes before we happened, yes, that would be wrong. But I'm not claiming that. What Christians claim is that the God that created the universe and built the regularities
Pure
into it
speculation.
is capable.
Pure speculation.
Well,
Wait a
let's
minute.
allow
No, this
John to
is
finish
worth
his
listening
point.
this isn't speculation.
Well, let's listen and then you respond, Peter.
Peter, it's dead easy to say it's not worth listening to. You tempt me to say that about some of the things you say, but I'm not going to do that. Because it seems to me it's very important to listen to what Christianity claims before you judge it. And what is claimed is the God who creates the universe and sustains it is not subject to laws as if they were laws of a land. He set up the regularities and he can feed a new event into them. And the claim is, and with this I finish, that God raised Christ from the dead by an input of colossal power.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, you've got it, Peter, in one.
Look, I mean, this
Well,
is...
that is the claim at the end of the day.
But, I mean, this is... everyone knows here that's nonsense. What you're inventing is an agent who can do anything he likes. He or she likes, I suppose you have to say these days. And so it is the laziest way of accounting for observations, sometimes observations that were never actually made. Religious explanations which resort to God did it are intellectually lazy. I won't use a stronger term than that, but I do think that they are lazy because, I mean, what does it mean as an explanation? You lie there saying, oh, God did it, and everyone says, oh, I understand now. Religious explanations are easy to accept by the unthinking. Science is difficult to accept because it involves a lot of thought. You really have to tease out the processes by which an event occurs. You can't simply say, and God did it. You've got to go through, in biology, you delve down into, if you like, the chemistry of the organism. In chemistry, you delve down into the physics of the underlying processes. And I accept maybe in physics, you have to delve down into the underlying mathematical fabric of whatever I mean by that. It's jolly hard work, and you've got to work on it. But it's more satisfying when you get to the end of an explanation than that extraordinarily lazy way of pretending to explain by saying, and abracadabra, God did it. I mean, that is intellectually corrupt.
Let's be clear. Peter Atkins is right to call the resurrection story absurd. Not to be cruel, but because it defies everything we know about biology, medicine, and physics. Once a body dies, decomposition begins within minutes. Cells break down. Organs fail. Brain function is permanently lost. There is zero empirical evidence, none, that a dead human being has ever come back to life after days in a tomb. Lennox tries to dance around this with philosophical wordplay. God isn't breaking the laws of nature, he's just feeding in new events. But that's not an explanation. That's just invoking magic and calling it divine. It's not based on data, observation, or repeatability. It's the same reasoning used for thousands of unverified religious claims throughout history, from Osiris to Krishna to Muhammad's night journey. Belief doesn't make something true. He compares God to a thief overwriting arithmetic in a hotel drawer. But that only proves the point. If the drawer has less money than expected, We assume theft because we have evidence that theft happens. We don't assume magic. That's exactly how science works, by seeking the most plausible, evidence-based explanation. And Lennox's ultimate fallback? That God, who made the rules, can break them. But that's the problem. If you allow supernatural exceptions anytime you hit a difficult question, you're no longer doing reasoning. You're escaping it. It's a shortcut that ends the conversation and replaces inquiry with obedience. Atkins is right. Religious explanations aren't just unhelpful. They're lazy. They shut down investigation. Science, on the other hand, demands proof. It works hard for its answers. And it's brought us everything from antibiotics to spaceflight to the internet you're watching this video on. If belief in miracles had any real explanatory power, it would have produced results by now. It hasn't. So here's the question for you. Do you want answers based on hope or on evidence? If you're tired of "God did it" being used to explain the unknown, hit like, drop a comment below, and subscribe for more thoughtful breakdowns like this. Let's keep asking questions and insisting on real answers.
No scientist has all the answers. But the one thing you shouldn't say is that because I don't know, therefore God did it. That's a
What do you
cowardly
think
way out.
happens when you die?
As Bertrand Russell said, I believe that when I die, I shall rot, and nothing of my ego shall remain.
That's it.
Yes?
The end. Nothing. There's nothing else.
How could it be otherwise? You have a brain, an evolved brain, which works by nerve impulses, and when that decays, what could possibly be left?
And Richard Dawkins joins me now. Richard Dawkins, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to appear on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Pleasure.
I assume you will be uncensored.
Of course.
You've never been censored, have you?
No.
In fact, people have tried to censor you, and we're going to come to a bit of that later on. This cancel culture has even come to your door. What do you make of that? People these days not wanting to hear opinions they don't like.
I think it's very sad. I think, especially in universities, where I've spent all my life, universities are places where you should be free to speak your mind and listen, even to something that you don't like. And it's very tragic that universities seem to have bought into the idea that if you don't like what you think you're going to hear from somebody, you should shut them up and refuse to let them speak.
Yeah, I mean, I find it completely baffling that at a place of education where the whole point is to test your own thought processes and to deliberately be exposed to other thoughts, we're now in a place where a lot of students feel they just don't want to hear it. They only want to hear stuff that validates their own opinion.
They use this word safe. They want to feel safe. And university is the one place where you should not feel safe.
Yes,
Certainly
it
not
should be
intellectually
dangerous.
safe. Yes, exactly.
In terms of thinking,
Yes.
You know, I just think you want to be constantly challenged and provoked about what you believe and what you think.
You want to be physically safe, but
Yes.
intellectually you should be.
So here we are, watching universities, the supposed sanctuaries of free thought, become echo chambers. It's almost absurd at this point. Instead of being places where students should be grappling with different perspectives, universities have started to prioritize safe spaces, which, let's be honest, is really just another way to say, let's shield ourselves from uncomfortable truths. Look, I get it. No one likes to be challenged all the time. But that's the thing. Education is supposed to challenge you. It's supposed to stretch your thinking, to push you into uncomfortable territory. If you only want to hear things that affirm your beliefs, you're not learning. You're just comforting yourself with your own biases. This whole idea that universities should shield students from uncomfortable opinions is not just misguided, it's dangerous. Think about it. You're supposed to be preparing yourself for the real world. And in the real world, no one cares whether you feel comfortable or safe. The world doesn't stop to validate your opinions. It challenges them, and it forces you to adapt, grow, and evolve. Universities should be places where ideas clash, where you're forced to test your thinking and sharpen your arguments. This mindset of, I don't like that opinion, so let's cancel it, is the antithesis of what education is supposed to be.
I think the whole cancel culture, woke kind of world we live in is a fascinatingly disturbing one, and you've got strong views on it. But I want to start, because you're known as one of the world's big thinkers, I want to start with some big theme stuff. And I guess there's no bigger theme than evolution itself. And I think I'd ask a question like this. What do we know now about where we've come from? And what don't we know?
Okay, We know once you've got a self-replicating entity, which nowadays is DNA, but it wasn't originally, once you've got life started, once natural selection, Darwinian natural selection has got going, then we pretty much understand the 4 billion year history of what's given rise to us and all other living creatures. We don't know how it started, and that's still a mystery, and it may always be a mystery, because it happened a very long time ago, and we may never know exactly what did happen. We know the kind of thing it had to be.
What kind of thing do you think it was?
It was the origin of a self-replicating molecule, a molecule that makes copies of itself. DNA is such a molecule, but the original one was almost certainly not DNA, because DNA is it's been called a high-tech replicator. There had to be a precursor to DNA. Something, the laws of chemistry gave rise to a molecule which had this unusual property of making copies of itself, which mutated, changed in random ways, and that gave rise to competition between rival versions of it, and that gave rise to the whole panoply of life eventually.
Okay, so I'm a Catholic. I was raised a Catholic, so I'm a religious person, which I know is anathema to you, and we'll come to that. But my arguments with atheists, historically, have always come down to one thing, and maybe you've got an answer which will persuade me of the folly of my ways.
The idea that life must have been created by a higher power because it's so complex is something we've heard for centuries. But let's be real. That argument just doesn't hold up anymore. We know that life came from a self-replicating molecule, something that evolved over billions of years, shaped by natural selection. That's it. There's no need to invoke a god here. We're constantly told that life's complexity proves there must be a creator. But if complexity requires a creator, doesn't that just shift the problem? Now we have to explain where the creator came from. And guess what? That leads to even more complexity. This is the problem with the God of the gaps argument. The more science advances, the more these gaps shrink. A god is not the answer. Natural processes are. We've seen it time and time again. When science doesn't have an answer, some people rush to fill the void with the idea of a god. But here's the thing. We don't need a supernatural explanation for natural phenomena. There is no need to cling to an outdated worldview just because we don't have all the answers yet. As science progresses, it fills in these gaps, and the need for supernatural explanations becomes less and less. This is simple. Let's follow the evidence, not just throw our hands up and say, God did it.
Which is this. What was there at the start?
We don't know. But I don't know, and you don't know.
But no human brain, unless you want to correct me, can actually comprehend nothingness, right?
No, but it's a fallacy to think that because I don't understand how it happened, therefore God did it. I mean, that's just weak.
Well, no, okay, but I'm prepared to have an open mind about this.
Yes.
But somebody did. And I just have never met a human brain that can explain to me what happened before, say you go for the Big Bang argument. What was there before? What does nothing look like?
Physicists are debating this. I'm not a physicist, but they're debating it. My point is that they don't know, and I don't know, and you don't know, and it doesn't help to postulate a God that did it.
But you're certain it's not a God, and yet you admit you don't know.
No, I'm certain that it doesn't help to postulate something very complicated at the outset, because what we've got is primeval simplicity, and from that stems everything. And what science does, it starts with simplicity, which is relatively easy to understand, and from that it develops into the whole of the universe and the whole of life. It doesn't help to start with complexity, and a creator has to be complex, whatever else he is.
The reason that I subscribe to the theory that there must be a more powerful being out there than anything the human race has created is because, like I say, a human brain can't comprehend nothingness or what may have come before nothingness. We can't. We're not able to extrapolate what that is, right? I mean, no scientist can explain nothingness, can they? Plausibly.
Well, maybe they can't. You'd have to talk to a physicist. But even
Could you explain it?
No, quite not a physicist. But
you're a very smart guy, and you're a very vehement atheist.
No, I'm not. I'm not that vehement.
Well, you're pretty vehement. I mean, you just think all belief in all gods is ludicrous, right?
I think that it doesn't help to introduce complexity at the outset. That's my
No,
point.
I get that, but
No, well, I don't think you do get it.
well, no, I do but you're asking me to consider that my own belief in a deity that may be above human thinking and understanding and brain power that was there.
Theists love to bring this one up, as though it's the trump card that proves God exists. But here's the thing. Just because we don't know something doesn't mean we should insert a deity into the equation. We don't know exactly what happened before the Big Bang, and to be honest, it might be something beyond our comprehension right now. But that doesn't mean it must have been a supernatural being. The Big Bang Theory doesn't require God. It just means that, at some point, everything we see around us started from a singularity, and it's expanded ever since. The fact that we don't know what was there before doesn't force us to leap to the conclusion of God did it. This is a classic argument from ignorance fallacy. Just because we don't have an answer yet doesn't mean we should insert a God into the void. We're still figuring it out, and we should remain humble in acknowledging that, but that doesn't mean we make up answers based on our comfort zones.
Universally, that my theory is scientifically flawed, whereas I would throw back at you, okay, but I need to be given an alternative. I need some scientist somewhere to explain to me, right, 4 billion years, all right, but then what was there before that?
Well, scientists can't answer that, and what they say is things like it's like going north of the North Pole. I'm sure. I gather you recently introduced Stephen Hawking. He probably said that to you.
Yeah, he did actually. Yeah.
But the point is this: science can explain things starting with simplicity and working up to complexity.
No, I get that, but where science can't explain something, i.e. in the case I just gave you, is it not possible that you're all wrong on the atheist side of the argument?
We could be all wrong. But
And you might get a shocking surprise one day when you're no longer with us.
You might.
And you discover we were right all along.
It's possible.
Do you concede it's possible?
It's highly unlikely.
But you don't know, though, do you?
No, of course I don't. Scientists take a pride in admitting what they don't know. And they don't know what happened before the Big Bang. They don't even admit that the word before means anything with respect to the Big Bang. Physicists will tell you.
But it has to. I mean,
Well, it doesn't, because that's a naive statement. Physicists will say that you do not have to say there was a time began at the Big Bang, is what some physicists will say.
Yeah, but to which I immediately respond with my basic human brain. Well, OK, if time began, when did it begin?
Well, quite.
And what was there before?
Quite.
Which is a fairly obvious question.
It is a very obvious question. It's too obvious, and physicists will tell you you're being naive.
Yeah, but they don't know why I'm...
And here's where things really start to get muddled. Theists argue that because we can't comprehend nothingness, there must be a God. It's almost like a fallback position when science doesn't have a clear answer. But this kind of thinking is really just intellectual laziness. The truth is, we don't have to understand everything to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. It's not an excuse to jump to supernatural conclusions. Sure, the origins of the universe may be beyond our current understanding, but that doesn't justify saying God did it as the ultimate explanation. The universe is complex, and while we can't explain everything about its beginnings, that doesn't mean that a supernatural being is the most plausible answer. Think about it this way. Every time we've run into a mystery in the past, we didn't just hand it over to a god. We kept digging, exploring, and questioning. And guess what? Time and time again, natural explanations have emerged. So why not keep doing that instead of retreating to an ancient, simplistic idea of a god?
Being naive. Because they can't provide any actual scientific
as you've
evidence.
just said, the human brain is not capable of grasping
Right, that's
these
my
things.
point.
Yes.
So why is it not possible that there is a superior being, power, which many people believe in different ways?
It's possible there are
different
fairies
types
at the bottom of the garden. I mean, all sorts of things are possible. you can't deny that.
Well, except I've never seen fairies at the end of the garden, have you?
No, you've never seen God either.
No, but you don't know for sure that either doesn't exist.
No, I don't know that fairies don't exist. Fairies may be leprechauns, for all I know.
Do you accept... Have you got milder about this as you've got older?
Yes.
Have you got more accepting that you may be wrong? Less certain?
Well, yes, of course, a scientist may always be wrong, and that's definitely a thing that a scientist has to say. But I'm not vehement. You're provoking me to be vehement because you're taking that tone with me.
Well, you've been provoked before.
Yes.
And you've been quite vehement in response. I'm actually not trying to provoke you. I'm genuinely curious.
Yes.
Because I don't have all the answers, but I'm always sceptical of people who think they do. I don't think you do.
Absolutely not.
But your admission that you don't have all the answers, to me, is quite interesting, because it lends the possibility you might be wrong.
Well, it's not interesting. I mean, no scientist has all the answers. But the one thing you shouldn't say is that because I don't know, therefore God did it. That's a
What do you
cowardly
think
way out.
happens when you die?
As Bertrand Russell said, I believe that when I die, I shall rot, and nothing of my ego shall remain.
That's it.
Yes.
The end. Nothing. There's nothing else.
How could it be otherwise? I mean, you have a brain, an evolved brain, which works by nerve impulses, and when that decays, what could possibly be left?
So you don't believe in, for example, a spirit or a soul? None of that is... That's all conditional entirely on a link to an actual cerebral...
Yes, if by spirit or soul you mean something that outlasts the brain, then I do not believe in it, no.
Really?
Well,
This is something a bit more personal. Death. Many say death is not the end, that there's something greater waiting on the other side, but the reality is death is the end, and that's okay. In fact, it makes life even more meaningful. Remember this: if there's no afterlife, we don't get to live forever, so we better make the most of the time we do have. And that's what gives life its urgency and its beauty. We know this is all we have, so we live with purpose. But when you introduce the concept of an afterlife, you start to undermine this idea. You start to live in a way that doesn't truly appreciate the finite nature of life. The problem with religious beliefs in the afterlife is that it shifts your focus away from the here and now. If you're always looking to the next life, you may miss out on the full, rich experience of this one. Death is a part of life. It's sad, but it's also natural. And if you're constantly looking for a way out, some divine promise of another life, you might miss the chance to fully embrace the one you have.
how could I?
Well, people who've gone through weird sort of out-of-body, near-death experiences where they've been pronounced dead for a few minutes, they always talk about, almost all of them talk about this weird...
There's a tunnel of light at the end.
Yeah, so, I mean,
Yeah.
it could be, couldn't
Yes.
it?
Yes, well, read Susan Blackmore on that.
Would you like to be pleasantly surprised, or would you be appalled if you were wrong?
Well, I would be pleasantly surprised for a while. I don't think I'd like to live for all eternity, would you?
I don't know, it depends what it's like.
Well...
If eternity was watching, cricket at Lord's all day and watching Arsenal win every weekend, yes, give me that.
Really?
Well, if eternity is blissful and a wonderful experience, as some people believe...
I think there is something actually rather frightening about eternity. And I'd be quite glad to be spending it under a general anaesthetic.
Do you fear, given the finality of what you think death to be, do you fear it as you get older?
I fear the process of dying, but when you're dead, you don't know anything. It's just like before you were born. I think it was Mark Twain said, I was dead for billions of years before I was born and never suffered the smallest inconvenience.
But when you have loved ones who've died, for example...
That's tragic.
Yeah, but how do, as somebody who believes literally in the finality, the rotting of a body and that's it, it must be worse than for somebody like me, where I genuinely believe there's something better to come.
It's worse, so what?
Not so what, just curious that it must be for you awful each time, far
Yes.
worse than it is for people who have a belief.
Yes, it is.
A lot of people take great comfort from their belief in God, that there is a different life out there.
Yes, they do. So
You don't
what?
have that sucker at all.
No.
So is it incredibly painful? More for you, perhaps, than somebody
No, I don't think so.
who is a believer?
Let me put it to you this way. If you really did believe it, wouldn't you say to the person on the deathbed, looking forward to seeing you in purgatory?
A lot of people say, looking forward to seeing you in another life, yeah.
Yes.
A lot of people say that.
You don't really believe it, though.
Actually, I do. Yeah, I do, actually. Because I find it, when I think about it in big picture, which is your great thing, I think, how likely is it that we just got put on this planet, Earth, as human beings, as a one-off kind of entity that existed here, and then you die and that's it? And it only lasted 4 billion years, and before that was absolutely nothing.
Evolution is not random and purposeless. It's a process driven by natural selection. And the beauty of it is that it doesn't need any supernatural force to explain it. We've been told time and time again that life is too complex to have happened by chance. But that's a misunderstanding of how evolution works. It's not a random process in the way people think. It's a process shaped by environmental pressures, competition, and adaptation. It's a process that works over billions of years, and it doesn't need a creator to make it happen. What's amazing is that we don't need a god to appreciate the elegance of life's design. Evolution is the reason we're here, and it's a natural process that explains our existence in a way that doesn't require supernatural intervention. This is about embracing a world where reason, evidence, and critical thinking guide us toward understanding. It's a worldview that recognizes the beauty and complexity of life without resorting to supernatural explanations. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
I'll ask you bluntly what you ask in the book, which is Islam a religion of war or peace?
Well, I'll take the first whack at that. I think we have different instincts, I think, Majid and I here, and my instincts for many conversations now are to defer to his instincts, because I think I had no interest in winning the debate for atheism against religion in my conversation with Majid. I was not trying to convince him that there is no God or that it's illegitimate intellectually to think that the Quran is in some sense, a divinely inspired book. That's not my purpose, and though I still hold those views, the real purpose of our collaboration is to figure out some path forward, politically and intellectually and ethically, to arrive at a future where we're not seeing the kind of mayhem and callousness and divisiveness born of religious differences. And so, but Majid takes the line in the book that it's neither a religion of war nor a religion of peace, it's a religion. And all religions have their toxic and their benign aspects. And it really depends on just what you emphasize. I'm a little more, I think if you just catch Majid at that moment, if that's all he says, what he's saying is indistinguishable from many apologists who are actually playing hide the ball with the articles of faith here. People like Reza Aslan and people who are well known to just dodge the matter and who think that it is tantamount to bigotry to single out Islam for any special attention at this moment in history. But Majid doesn't stop there, and that's why I had such a productive conversation with him. He admits that there's a link between specific ideas and specific behaviors. And so I think Islam has some specific ideas that are really problematic, which we discuss in the book. Specifically, a belief in martyrdom and a belief in jihad as incumbent upon any Muslim, certainly any Muslim male, in defense of the faith, and a certainty of paradise. I mean, this is a little dark jewel of religious demagoguery that I think we have to figure out some way to destroy intellectually. This conversation is, I think, the basis of a way forward in that direction.
So on the same question, but I want to touch on something Sam said earlier about this notion that any Muslim engaging in dialogue with a critic of Islam, with an atheist, with somebody like Sam or Ayan, is necessarily either a sellout, an Uncle Tom, a native informant, or any of the above. Yesterday, by a non-Muslim, left-wing, white, and particularly silver-spooned critic, I was called an Islamophobe. I want to address this head on before we proceed, if I may, because I think it's disgusting to delegitimize my voice in that way. And what I would like to say to them, and I hope they're listening, is the day that you have had to dodge neo-Nazi hammer attacks on the streets of Essex, as I have, the day that you've been arrested at gunpoint and profiled by police at the age of 15, as I have, the day that you've forcibly had your DNA taken from you and profiled at airports, as I have, and the day that you face the grip of a torturer in Egypt's dungeons because of your Islamist political views, as I have, is the day you get to talk to me about Islamophobia. The day you were born to Muslim parents, are a Muslim yourself and have a Muslim child, is the day you get to talk to me about anti-Muslim bigotry. Until that day, being a non-Muslim, and particularly being a white male, to speak to me and to police my conversation about my own religion and its future in this world, and to choose for me who I'm allowed to speak to, is a form of colonial patronage that I could do without. It's a reverse form of racism. It's a policing of the conversation. It's born of a racism of low expectations, because it assumes that the only good, it's the true good Muslim, bad Muslim game, by the way, because it assumes the only good Muslim is the angry Muslim, and there happens to be a bit of a brain malfunction in the heads of these people who assume that despite the fact I've been through all of that, I'm not sitting here in front of you ranting and raving and spitting and frothing at the mouth. Therefore, because I'm not angry, somehow I'm not the good Muslim. It's patronizing in the extreme. And in particular, as I said, the two people who have named, Sam's, I think, mentioned one of them, the two people who have called me a native informant or an Uncle Tom or an Islamophobe, both happen to be non-Muslim, white, middle-class American males who haven't seen any of what I've just described. And I think they need to just stop and check their privilege, first of all. And it's sad that the debate has got to this. To very quickly answer your question, therefore, I have a right to have a view on that question. And that question, whether Islam is a religion of peace or a religion of war, for some Muslims, it's a religion of war. For the vast majority of Muslims today, it's a religion of peace. Just like for the US, for Americans, for some Americans, the US Constitution supports the right to abortion, and for others it doesn't. The same document, the same text, is the subject of dispute and fierce dispute in this instance. And one of the things that we discuss in this dialogue is that actually if Islam is only what Muslims make it through the process of ijtihad or interpretation, if the vast majority of Muslims today are not jihadists, then only because that's what Muslims are interpreting it to be, today it happens to be by majority rule a religion of peace. But that's not to say that there is an incredibly vocal and disproportionately prominent minority within our own communities of Muslims who subscribe to the view not only that it's a religion of jihad and war, but are actually fighting and engaged in that war. And it's that vocal and organized, highly organized minority, as represented by ISIS, in some instances they're controlling countries, that we must challenge head on and accept the fact they exist and not obfuscate and bury our heads in the sand and pretend that this isn't really a problem.
The Quran itself contains verses that extremists have historically taken literally. For example, Surah 9:111 promises believers paradise in exchange for fighting and killing in the cause of Allah. Surah 8:12 talks about striking fear into the hearts of unbelievers. These aren't fringe interpretations. They're written directly into the text, and history shows that when taken literally, they inspire violence. We can see this pattern throughout Islamic history. The early Islamic conquests of the 7th and 8th centuries spread by the sword, from Arabia into North Africa, Spain, and Persia. These weren't peaceful conversions. They were military campaigns justified by jihad. Fast forward to today, and groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram cite these same texts as their blueprint. This isn't comparable to Christianity or Judaism in the same way. Yes, the Bible contains violent passages, but modern Christian majority societies don't have widespread movements killing in God's name. By contrast, Pew Research surveys show large percentages of Muslims in countries like Afghanistan, 99%, and Iraq, 91%, supporting Sharia law as the official law of the land, including punishments like stoning for adultery or death for apostasy. The science of radicalization also backs this up. Studies from scholars like Robert Pape at the University of Chicago found that suicide terrorism is most heavily concentrated in Islamic groups because of the religious promise of reward in the afterlife. That dark jewel Harris describes, martyrdom leading to paradise, isn't an abstract idea. It's the single most powerful recruiting tool jihadists use, especially for young men with few opportunities.
And I hope everyone's read the books. Those of you who haven't read those books, there's a bad guy in the Harry Potter books called Voldemort. That people, the two things. First of all, they deny he exists, and they're also, while denying that he exists, because he's meant to be dead, but he actually isn't really dead. The second thing is they're too scared to name him. So instead what they say is, he who must not be named is dead. Now, I took that and said, look, that Voldemort effect, being too scared, too petrified to name the problem when actually it's staring at you in the face, is what's happened with Islamist extremism. And the problem is we have been unable to name the problem, led by President Obama himself all the way down. Whereas actually recently, Prime Minister Cameron, not least because we've been working through Quilliam very hard to advise him on this, but among many others, has named the Islamist ideology just last month in his speech and his intervention on this debate. I'm hoping the next president of the US does the same. What's the problem with not being able to name the problem? There are two problems here. External to Muslims and within Muslim communities. If we can't name Islamist extremism and we just say the ideology of extremism, the problem is that outside of Muslim communities, many non-Muslims will assume you're talking about Islam, the religion itself, and all Muslims. That's the first problem, because by not naming it, you're blurring those lines and you're increasing the obfuscation. And trust me, there are a whole bunch of nut jobs out there who would take delight, who would take pleasure in stigmatizing every single Muslim, which Sam doesn't do, nor does Ayan. They don't do that. I've personally spoken to both of them about this, and in many instances watched their speeches. But there are plenty of people out there that would like to do this. So that's danger number one. By not naming it and isolating it from the religion, you're blurring those lines and making it easier for people to blame every single Muslim. The danger within Muslim communities is that by not naming the problem, we are disempowering the voices of those reforming Muslims who are attempting and struggling, who are vulnerable within their own communities and who are struggling to bring about that reform dialogue within Muslim communities. We are disempowering their voices. We are not allowing them to make the case within the religion of Islam to say, the problem isn't Islam, fair enough, but there is something we have to address. And that something is this Islamist ideology that has hijacked our voice. But actually, by depriving them of that language, what are they left to say? How are they meant to have that debate? And instead what happens is every gay Muslim, every feminist Muslim, every liberal Muslim, every dissenting voice is silenced, is shut down, is stigmatized, and those who shout the loudest are the ones dominating the discourse. And then we complain when mainstream society says, where are the moderates? We're not even giving them a lexicon to have this conversation.
Sam, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, well, I think we should be candid about how depressing the state of the conversation is around this conversation. Because, for instance, I think at one point you said to me that you either expected or in fact were receiving more criticism from with regard to talking to me than talking to Islamists or even
Absolutely,
jihadis.
yeah.
And so he could go and talk to a failed suicide bomber, right?
And everyone's happy.
And that's completely legitimate use of his time, and of course we need to have conversations. How else could we move forward? But talking to famous atheists over here, that's as controversial as it gets. And that is of a piece with this liberal or pseudo-liberal criticism that both of us are getting on this topic, where people can't seem to see that, for one, that we're talking about ideas and their consequences. And everything we say about Islam or Islamism or jihadism, or depending on what the focus is, conservative Islam, applies to white converts to the faith, and it applies to people in 100 different countries and a wide variety of ethnicities. If ever I say something disparaging about Islam compared to Hinduism or Buddhism, well, then that has nothing to do with racism or the colors of people's skin. I mean, so racism and bigotry against people based on ethnicity or the country they're born, that has nothing to do with this conversation at all. And so this meme of Islamophobia that has been thrown up to prevent conversations of this kind is really quite destructive. And it's something that, I mean, the hypocrisy here should be just shattering to liberals in particular, because you have, as Maja just said, we are abandoning the women and the free thinkers and the gays and the public intellectuals and the apostates these are the most vulnerable people on earth in Muslim societies, where you have atheist bloggers, or not even atheist bloggers, just secular bloggers.
People like Raif Badawi.
Getting hacked to death, and liberals are not only not giving them any tools by which to better their lives, they are castigating the people who are trying to shine a light on the disproportionate nature of the problem here. To be gay or even a woman in a country like Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia or Bangladesh. I mean, these are unlucky places to be in a minority of that kind. And so it's as we argue at some length in the book, liberalism has really failed us here. And it's not, and you can criticize Christianity all you want, and liberals will never bat an eye. You can criticize Mormonism all you want, but the moment you try to shine a light on the problem of, I think, appropriately described as Islamism for this conversation, just the full armamentarium of political correctness and cries of racism just hits you full in the face, and it is a thankless job. Nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to have this conversation because it is so poisonous, especially on college campuses.
History shows that ideologies grow stronger when society pretends they don't exist. For example, the Nazi Party in the 1920s was often dismissed as a fringe group until it was too late. With Islamism, the same mistake is happening. We have leaders, like President Obama at the time, who avoided even using the word. Yet groups like ISIS openly cite the Quran, including Surah 9:5. Slay the polytheists wherever you find them, as their justification. If we don't name this ideology, we give it cover. The facts back this up. Pew Research surveys show that in countries like Pakistan, 76% of Muslims support making Sharia the law of the land, and large percentages endorse punishments like death for leaving Islam. In Saudi Arabia, women cannot travel, marry, or work without male guardianship, a system enforced through religious law. Homosexuality is still punishable by death in Iran and Saudi Arabia. By refusing to call this Islamism, Western liberals silence reformist Muslims and leave minorities, women, apostates, gay Muslims, completely defenseless. Sam Harris is right. The Islamophobia label has become a shield for bad ideas. No one hesitates to criticize Christianity for opposing gay marriage. Yet when secular bloggers in Bangladesh are hacked to death for writing against Islam, Western intellectuals look away, afraid to offend. If we can't name Islamism, we can't fight it. And if we can't fight it, then the most vulnerable people, the women under veils, the apostates in hiding, the gay teenagers in fear, are the ones who pay the price.
One of the good things that's come from, for me, that's come from our dialogue is that at least I'm sensing that the emphasis has shifted from one about the metaphysical conversation about whether God really exists or not, to the political and social values that we need for just and stable societies. And that's where I'd like to see the conversation go. Because I think the metaphysical conversation about whether God exists or not is less interesting to me. What's more interesting is that you can have the Church of England in the United Kingdom, but they won't be chopping people's heads off, and they won't be lashing people like Raif Badawi just for writing a blog in Saudi Arabia. And so if we can get to that stage, then we can have these conversations without fear of attack and and lynch mobs coming to the doors. So I'd like that emphasis, and I think this book leads to that. I don't know if you agree, Sam, but I think that what comes from this dialogue is that the emphasis is very clear and loud, is on reasserting liberalism and civil liberties and human rights that cut both ways. Not just in favor of minority communities, but also in certain instances, minority communities have responsibilities to others, to mainstream society, to reciprocate those civil liberties in their interactions. And I think that's the focus that I'd like to continue through these dialogues with others, to make it sort of a real focus on liberalism and values and ideas rather than whether God exists or not.
But Sam, I think that's right, and the substance of the book gets into that. Sam, though, you highlight in the book that the two basic tenets of Islam, it's hatred or rejection of infidels and this notion of a post-earth paradise, means that linking Islam with liberalism, right, with gay rights, women's rights, whatever you want to call it, may be desirable, but it's essentially based on a pretense. It's essentially intellectually dishonest. Is that fair, or do you think that they are compatible?
Well, the path forward that Majid really found in our conversation, and you'll see that it took some effort to convince me to sort of follow him through that, keyhole-sized aperture in this just wall of medieval ignorance, is that basically that by the lights of Islam, there is no true Islam. There's no pope. There's no place to stand within Islam to say that your view of the faith is the truly canonical one. And so there is a radical kind of pluralism there, which reformers can take advantage of, where you can say, listen, there's whatever, you can be as doctrinaire as you want. You can be right of Mullah Omar in terms of your theological commitments, but what you can't be is someone who thinks that applies to all Muslims for all time. Now, I remain quite skeptical that we can have conversations with people of Mullah Omar's sort. We're not going to have a dialogue with al-Baghdadi or the rest of ISIS, but as a general matter, from Majid's side, that the way forward is to recognize that this pluralism demands a commitment to secularism. It demands, because there is no one version of Islam, you can't, you have to keep your version in this zero-sum contest with all these other versions out of public policy and out of politics. And then that commitment to secularism can hopefully open a space for genuine liberalism and a genuine commitment to all these other values that we want, which aren't best expressed in any religion, frankly. They're the result of a modern conversation about ethics and politics and human rights.
Yeah, I think you've just done a wonderful job summarizing my stance there, so I won't repeat it. But I think it's important, if you read the dialogue, you'll see that there are some surprising positions that traditional Islamic theologians have taken, which have been very literalist stances, but have led to very liberal outcomes. I'll just mention one, and I think it's important at this stage for me to say, look, I'm not a religious leader. I'm not even devout. I want to make that very clear. Some of you will see me, and you'll see me doing things that aren't typically devout. I won't elaborate. But that's because I don't claim to be devout or religious. I am a Muslim who is not devout. Secondly, I don't speak on behalf of all Muslims. I'm not a leader for Muslims. I'm not a religious leader. I'm not a community representative. In fact, I find the whole concept of community representatives troubling and problematic. In particular, they tend to be aging men, graying men who are especially socially conservative, who deign to speak on behalf of everyone. So I don't subscribe to that model in the first place. So I don't want anyone to think what I say means all Muslims must think this. But that's part of the beauty, you see. That's exactly what I'm advocating, to open that debate up to pluralism. We have within Islamic history and theology a concept, because there's no clergy, as Sam mentioned, that if anybody subscribes to a religious injunction and they are correct, they get 2 rewards, فَلَهُ أَجْرًا. And if they are incorrect, فَمَنْ أَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ. They still rewarded 1. Because that process of legal interpretation from the scripture is not wrong if you're legally qualified to do it. And the rest of the people, known as the awam, the followers, the muqallideen, those who follow a theologian, aren't judged for whichever option they choose. So there's one example I'll give you from the dialogue that I mentioned in discussion with Sam. And that is that from the earliest exegesis of the Quran, from the earliest tafsir, the Hanafi school of law, comes a man known as Abu Bakr al-Jassas, who was the first mufassir, or the first exegete of the Quran, to elaborate and explain upon its meanings. And he took a very literalist view of the word khamr in Arabic, which is commonly translated today to mean alcohol. He took a very literalist approach to that word, and he didn't budge from its linguistic meaning, which was, and everyone concedes this point, by the way, that originally khamr only meant grape wine, the wine from grapes. It doesn't mean whiskey, it doesn't mean gin, it doesn't mean beer, it only means the wine from grapes. And the early Hanafis, which was the first school of jurisprudence, I must emphasize, the closest in the times of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, say that therefore every other form of alcohol is legal apart from grape wine. Now that sounds like a particularly outright position today when considering where the state of affairs are for the vast majority of Muslims who don't touch any form of alcohol. But I give this example not to take a position on it, but simply to emphasize something. And that is that form of pluralism that existed in those early years, that has been lost because of the rise of both fundamentalism and Islamism, and I distinguish between the two in the dialogue. The only way forward is for us to recognize that. And of course, relative to medieval periods, it may have been good, but actually there's a lot in the medieval time that we don't want to reclaim. But we have to just recognize that exists because no one has the right to claim that they have the definitive view on any scripture, on any text. So the logical conclusion from all of this can only be secularism, because there's no pope in Islam. And that's essentially in a nutshell what I'm arguing in the dialogue with Sam, and what I hope that Sam has kind of recognized in what I'm saying as well.
What makes this final stretch so important is that it exposes the heart of the issue. The real challenge isn't whether God exists, but whether Islam can ever coexist with liberal values like human rights and freedom of speech. Harris is right to press the point. When you read the Quran and Hadith plainly, you don't find tolerance or universal love. You find repeated commands to separate from or even fight against unbelievers. The promise of paradise for martyrdom gives extremists a divine license to kill, and no amount of reinterpretation can erase that. History shows this clearly. Christianity, for all its dark chapters, went through the Reformation and the Enlightenment, producing societies where religion was forced out of politics. That shift allowed space for free thought and modern values to develop. Islam never had its enlightenment. Instead, it hardened around dogma, and the pluralism Majid describes was crushed by fundamentalists. Even when scholars disagreed in early centuries, like those who argued that only grape wine was forbidden while other alcohols were permissible, that kind of intellectual diversity has been suffocated by Wahhabi literalism. The reality is that because Islam has no central authority, anyone can claim their view is authentic, which means reformers are left competing with jihadists who use the same scripture. That's why Harris is right to say the only viable way forward is secularism. Liberal values, free speech, women's rights, gay rights, are not rooted in Islam. They are born out of modern secular ethics that rejected religious authority altogether. Without secularism, pluralism is just a slogan, because power always drifts back to those who enforce the harshest interpretation. And that leads us to the bigger question. Can Islam ever truly reform itself, or is secularism the only way to protect freedom and human dignity? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments, and if you value these kinds of deep conversations, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with others so we can keep the discussion alive.